Hey everyone, Randy with Extreme Sandbox here. Today we're going to do a complete training overview for the Bulldozer. So we do a lot of separate videos you've seen on our YouTube channel that break it into segments, but we've had a lot of requests just to have one complete video that covers it all. So our goal here is to put one new video that's got all those pieces together so you can watch it either way. So check this out and we'll go through all the different parts of operating a bulldozer. Again, this video, we're going to combine all the different elements of operating the bulldozer. We have this separately on our channel on YouTube, but we want to put one video together. We're really breaking this down into 4 different parts. The first is going to be the pre-op inspection, what you should be doing every day before you operate the equipment. The second will be an overview of this generic, I call it 101 training. It's going to be going over the very basic controls of the bulldozer. And the third one will get a little bit more advanced. We call it our 201 training. We'll go over some more specific techniques. And then lastly, we're going to finish up with parking, basically the end of the day routines for how you get your bulldozer set for the next day. So again, tune into these different segments and you can fast forward to certain pieces if you want to see different parts of that. Start with the pre-op inspection. So today we're running a Komatsu D61 bulldozer. No matter what piece of heavy equipment, I would say one of the most important parts is doing a very thorough pre-op inspection. Now for my pre-ops, every operator does them a little bit different. And as I've said in all my other videos, this is something I've learned along the way, but everyone's got a little bit different method on this. I like to break my pre-ops down into 3 different pieces. My first is the general walk around of the equipment. My second, I call compartments, is basically where I'm opening compartments, checking fluids, things like that. And my third and final one is where I get in the operator's seat, into the cab, and do my final checks there. So let's go ahead and we're going to start with our pre-op inspection. So with the pre-op inspection, the first thing with that walk around. Now the first thing I'll tell everyone, I'm not a diesel mechanic, nor should we expect any operators out there to be diesel mechanics. But just because you're not a mechanic doesn't mean you shouldn't, 1, know your machine, and 2, just be able to see some obvious signs. So, as much as I may not be a mechanic, I can look at something and tell if it just doesn't look right on there. That's where I think it's really important to step back and do the walk around and kind of look at the bigger picture. With my bulldozer here, I'm starting on the right side of it, and I'll just do a counterclockwise motion around the machine. I try to stay consistent no matter the piece. It does vary sometimes, but as long as you're covering the same elements, doesn't matter. Now with me on this one side, it's kind of top to bottom for me. So I'll look at the top, looking down, see if my roll cage, the protection system, the glass is all intact. There's no damage, obviously, to the lights, anything like that. From there, working down just to the main machine to see if anything obvious. Obviously, most of the stuff on the bulldozer is going to be the track system. So as I work my way down, this is going to be the most important piece to cover on this side. Here initially, I'm just looking at my tracks to basically see that I'm not missing, there's no bolts or anything missing, anything loose on any of my track pads. If I can see anything, there's bolts that are going to be attaching each of these. Now, again, depending on your site conditions, our site's been really muddy and wet, so you can see a lot of mud is packed into these. But again, I'm not looking to break anything down intent, like you don't have to get all the way in there, but I'm looking to see if anything really sticks out, and that includes looking above and then on the inside with the pads. If you saw any separation from the pads or any damage, anything like that, that would be an indicator. Now, underneath the machine, I'm looking at the rollers underneath there. I can also see the underside of the pads. All the rollers going around, if I see any obvious damage or anything like that, you'd want to note that and maybe dig in deeper. The front idler there, making sure it looks clear, there's nothing in there. And then coming back here, the final drive. This is the drive system for the bulldozer. Again, this is why it's important to keep your machines clean. As you can see, our tracks were shoveled out, but we've had some really less than ideal conditions. So you see it's fairly dirty in here, but I can still see if there's anything obvious. If I were to see anything that looked like a leak out of that drive, any fluids or anything that was wet there that looked like oil or anything else. I'm also trying to look at my teeth for wear on there, on the drive system itself. So if I could see anything in there that would indicate there might be damage, anything like that. And then overall with your track system, looking at the sag on the tracks. Is that something that you want to have a little bit of a sag on them? This is something where you look at your operator's manual, it'll tell you what the proper sag should be. If it can be too tight, it can be too loose. And that's things that if it was something need to be adjusted, we would just open that compartment, put some grease in to either tighten, that can tighten it out. But again, just looking at some of those obvious, if anything stands out to me. So everything looks good there. The other thing I'll note while I'm underneath here, I can actually see through to the hydraulic lines. Obviously in the Bulldozer, they're not quite as visible as like an excavator or wheel loader. So with this, you're looking at the hydraulic line, right in here. As I come forward, again, those hydraulic lines I was looking at in there, this is where if I can get over here and I can look in, those hydraulic lines are running right along the side there in between the tracks. So you're making sure if there's any rocks or anything in there, but I'm also looking for any leaks, any damage. And at that point, I'm coming to the front, I'm looking at my hydraulic cylinders. This is where you would see if there's any leaks or anything around those rings. If I saw debris like a dirt, sand or something on there, it could be a hydraulic leak that the material's sticking to. That would be a good indicator that something might be going on with that cylinder. I'm looking across the front here, same thing. I'm looking at the bushings and all the attachments here to make sure all of these are connected. There's nothing missing there. I'm looking to see if it looks like it's greased appropriately, so you can see where I've got grease there. And then the same thing with every single hydraulic cylinder, you're looking to see if there's any obvious damage to the cylinder, if there's any leaks, anything like that. And then the same thing with those hydraulic lines. You can see those, you would notice if something there looked like it was leaking or damaged. Don't see anything there. As that, I'm going to keep walking around the front. Now for the front, I'm just looking at my blade itself. And I'm trying to see my blade, basically the edge at the bottom. These can be wear, they can be taken off and replaced if I need to get a replacement at all on that. But I'm looking to any damage, if there's any bolts that are loose or anything to hold that my edge on there. I'm looking at that. Again, continuing my counterclockwise here. Same thing, I'm looking on the back here to see if there's any obvious damage, anything leaking, any bolts that are loose. Again, this is not, you don't have to be a mechanic to see if something just doesn't look right. And that's really what I'm just looking for. If I see anything, making sure everything's connected in there, there's nothing that's loose. Same thing with my cylinder. While I'm on this side, I'm looking now at my hoses on this side, seeing if there's any debris or anything in there. And then the same thing for the cylinder here. Okay, now I'm on this side of the tracks. So same thing on this side for the track, same thing I did on the other. Although again, I try and start a little bit on the top, work my way down. Often we focus so much on the lower undercarriage, which probably is the most important and expensive piece of that machine, but you want to make sure, look at a top to bottom. So looking at top, I can see my lights up on the top there, everything's intact, glass is all intact. I don't see any obvious damage to the cab, anything like that. Working my way down. The other thing is the exhaust system. While I'm here, it's making sure when I'm on the front or side, making sure the shield's in place, the guard, and the exhaust system itself. Sometimes these things will hit, if you're in a tighter area, debris or something like that could knock that stack loose. And your air filter, things like that. You're looking to see any obvious damage. Okay, now I'm down to the undercarriage. I'm looking at the same thing as what I looked at on the other side. First of all, I'm looking at my track pads all the way around. And this is where, I'm looking at the top. I can see if there's any bolts that look missing. But you'll see these are a fairly standard spacing on the pads. So a lot of times you're just looking around, and if there was a bolt or something missing, usually you're going to see a misalignment or something on those pads. So a lot of times I can go around the edge, and if something doesn't look right, it's probably because there's a bolt or something's missing in there. Then I'm looking at the rollers, the idler up front, making sure everything looks clear of debris, there's nothing lodged in there. It looks like it's spinning freely all the way down here. Same thing on the bottom here, I can see rollers. My final drive here, same thing if I saw, again, same thing I said, you can see our machines are very muddy. We do keep the tracks clean, or at least clear of debris in there to keep the rollers free, but this is where a good power cleaning is, at least once a week or once a month, I would say, keeping these clean. But I could still see if there was a leak or damage, I would be able to see that, no matter how much debris or dirt you have on there. And then I'm looking at my teeth, the few that I can see on that drive, I'll be able to see in there. And you can kind of see them going around here. So if I see anything obvious, I can't stress that enough. You don't feel people get intimidated. You don't have to be a mechanic to look at something and go, that just doesn't look right. Around the back, same thing. I'm looking up to the top of my cab. That's for Komatsu, the air conditioning unit is up there. So if there was any damage or anything up there, I've got a backup camera that I can see. Got my lights, glass, make sure everything's intact there, no damage. Coming down, I got my radiator in the back on the Komatsu, seeing if I see any obvious damage, if there was any damage or anything seen in there. And then coming down, this is where kind of getting down low, and also I like to look underneath the machine. This is where, and if anyone that's parked a car in their garage had an oil leak, first sign of that is you're going to see a little stain on your driveway or in your garage. So sometimes looking under a machine to see if there's any fluids that's leaked onto the ground, especially if it's been sitting overnight, is a good indicator. So I like to look down, see if I see anything that looks fresh or it's been fluids. I can see the inside of the drive system as well on both sides. So the same thing, seeing if that's clear. Okay, so that's my walk around. Again, I try and do that the same with every single piece of machinery, just because look at the obvious. Now I'm gonna get into my compartments. So we'll go back up on this side. So on this side in the Komatsu, there's really only one compartment. This is my hydraulics. So this one we're not doing a whole lot other than I've got my hydraulic filter right there, hydraulic oil. This is more just looking for any signs of damage. You know, if there was going to be a leak or something wrong with your hydraulics, it's probably going to show up some way, shape, or form in here. Again, if there was a leak on the filter or any of these hoses in here, all the connections come in through here. So that's where I would see any damage or anything like that. Everything looks good in there. Now let's go to the other side, check the engine oil and the other fluids on the other side. Okay. Now, the engine oil and all, this is on the Komatsu, the primary compartment will be in, but there's a lot of different pieces in here that we'll check. Engine oil is right there in the bottom, and a lot of times, if you're pulling that, I usually have just some kind of paper towel or something in there. I can see, I like to wipe it and put it in one more time. And I'm right there, right in the middle of where it should be. So that's the engine oil. Outside of that, the other things we have in here are air filters right here. This is if it's any larger debris or anything, open that up, see how much comes out. If there were a lot of debris that comes out of there, I would most likely pull this thing. They're really easy to pull out, your air filter, and then you can either blow those out or clean them. You might have to replace them. This also is an indicator up here. Komatsu has this, will tell us if that filter is getting clogged by how much air is going through there. So if I saw this where it said change filter up there, that's something where I would get a new filter. Outside of that, right next to here, we got our fuel filter. This is generally, you're looking down just at the bottom here. That's gonna show if there's any water, ice, any debris or anything in there. That should be something that you're gonna wanna either drain out through the filter or take some other action on that. Outside of that, I'm just looking again in the inside compartment. This is where you're looking to see if anything obvious, if anything's loose, anything looks broken. A lot of electrical connections in here. If you have anything frayed, any wires, anything like that, you'd want to address it. That's that one. We then have our diesel exhaust fluid. Really not much in here to connect. I would just, or check, I should say. I'm still looking though to make sure all the hoses, everything's intact, there's no leaks. And then finally, I've got my battery compartment. Again, not much here. Anytime I open any compartment, I'm looking at hoses to see if anything looks damaged or like that. And then for my battery connection, you know, generally you're looking at your terminals. Again, I don't necessarily pull off contacts every day to look at the contacts, but at least in your weekly, you're gonna wanna pull those off, see if they're corroded, anything else on your electrical connections. But again, I use this in the morning as an opportunity just to check and make sure. You know, a lot of times, like I said, I can't stress enough, just looking for something obvious. If there's anything that doesn't look right, well, you should probably dig in a little bit deeper just to make sure you're safe to operate that machine. Oh, and the other things, washer fluid and our coolant level right there. Again, these are other indicators in there to see if we have any issues. Finally, while I'm actually up on top, and I didn't mention this before, but especially on Komatsus, the fill caps, you got your hydraulics and your diesel over there. I've had enough of this happen where someone's left a cap off. I like to catch that in the morning. So usually when I'm up on the machine, I look, I can see my diesel fuel cap on, I can see my hydraulic oil cap on. If those are missing, obviously you're gonna wanna address that. Okay, the final piece to the pre-op is inside the operator seat. First thing, when I'm opening, making sure my doors will latch open. Not only that, but on the Bulldozer, there are 2 doors. I highly recommend unlocking both of them. I've seen many operators, they get lazy, they don't want to unlock the other side. However, for a safety perspective, you're going to want to be able to access from the outside both sides of that machine. So even though it'll unlock when you're inside, I highly recommend unlocking both your doors. But again, making sure to lock open. This is something where if the locks aren't working, you'll have that door, you'll think you'll have it open, it's gonna swing right back and knock you in the back of the head or something if it's windy out, so make sure they're locked open. As I'm coming in, all the way up, I'm making sure all my 3 points of contact, all of the handlebars, everything when I'm coming up, and my step, everything to get in the cab. There's no damage, anything like that. And I'm coming all the way in. Okay, once I'm in the cab, first thing, checking my seat belt, just making sure it's no damage, anything like that. Make sure it works. And then outside of that, before I start the machine, again, this is my time to look through the inside of the cab, see if there's anything obvious, any obvious damage, cracked windows, anything that just sticks out that I may not have seen from outside. Part of the reason on this too is the reason I stress little things like damage is if there is damage or something, you're gonna wanna report that. The last thing you wanna do is see something in the morning, don't say anything about it, and then the end of the shift, you bring this up to a supervisor or someone. They're gonna, well, how do we know it wasn't, you did it? So you're gonna wanna cover yourself. That's why you do a really thorough pre-op inspection and note anything. If it's something small, let someone know. My controls, I like to start, and without the machine on, just make sure I got free range on all of them. The boots that are on them aren't damaged or anything like that. That's where dust and things would get down in there. But making sure I have free range on all the joysticks, everything like that. My lock levers, making sure they are both operable and working. My pedal is working, and everything else that I would be manipulating when the machine's on. So now that that's done, then I'd go through and go ahead and turn the machine on. So always turn that over, one click. Again, for our Komatsus, they just boot up for a sec. The initial thing I'm looking for is any warning signs, anything on that display that would cause me not to want to start the machine. Right now, I'm all clear to start it. Once the machine is on, first thing I'm looking at there is my gauges, everything that's on the display. So again, now that it's running, definitely making sure there's no indicators, warnings, anything like that. From there, I'm checking, all my fuel for diesel exhaust fluid, the level there. Some of those basics, if you're getting started for the day, you want to make sure they're all set properly, and seeing if there's anything else that would stick out. After that, I would normally go through a light check again, depending on when I'm running. If I'm going to be running close to the night, I'd probably go through and cycle my lights on, get out, check those that they're operable. Same thing with my wipers. If I knew the potential of rain, I would probably cycle my wipers to make sure they all work, things like that. And then my air conditioning. Climate control, I usually go left to right when I'm in the cab, so I'm kind of over here, checking that. Works there. My throttle's right here. Everything else seems operable. Nothing. Got my rear view mirror up front there, coming around. There's my accessory here for if I had a ripper or something. Don't have that. And then I got my horn, checking things like that. Other than that, that's a really thorough, complete pre-op inspection. Again, can't stress it enough. It's probably the most important thing you'll do in the day, but also don't be intimidated. Just look for things that kind of stand out as obvious. It's so much easier to catch these things before something really bad goes wrong. That's why you want to do them early. So that's the end of our pre-op inspection. We are ready to go. Okay, everyone, so we did the pre-op inspection. Again, I think that is probably the most important part of the day that's often overlooked. But now I'm going to go into the very basic overview of Bulldozer controls. Now again, we're in a Komatsu D61 dozer. A lot of the controls are going to be very similar. They'll change a few things, but I'm going to try and keep it somewhat generic for you. Again, if you've ever operated a dozer, this is going to be something, you know, I'm going very basic here because I don't want to go into the advanced part. I want people to understand the basic controls. Now, with any piece of heavy equipment, safety is always your priority. So again, seatbelts already on. We did a pre-op inspection. I also encourage people for a site inspection, or at least a site overview, so we know where we're at. We're in a very controlled environment here, but obviously you're going to know where you're running your bulldozer. After that, all machinery has once it's running, there are safety lock levers, parking brake. There's a lot of different devices, but essentially my machine's running right now, but it's not going to go anywhere unless I have the safety lock levers engaged. So I've seen, again, each machine's a little bit different. Komatsu is these lock levers right here. So each side, if I pull one up, controls a joystick. So right and left. I really like the Komatsu system because it gives a layer of visibility through the door. So this is something you can see the bars up. A lot of the cat machines will have a parking brake. You'll see a red P and there's a red switch. That's the other one on there. So right now with that up, my machine is live. Now on the left, I've got my throttle. Generally, you're going to run these things at full throttle. Again, with any machinery, you don't want to do excessive idling, especially newer machinery. So that'll throttle it all the way up. Now, I like to just go over the basic controls initially. So with that said, your right hand is your blade control. Your left hand is your driving controls. So with my right hand, there's basically it's a 6-way pitch blade. There's 6 different movements you can do. If I pull back on this right, it's going to raise my blade up. If I go right hand forward, it's going to raise the blade, lower the blade down. If I go to the left, it's going to dip my left tip down. If I go to the right, it's going to tip my right corner down. And then I'll bring it back to straight. Then you've got a swing on that blade. This little thumb trigger here, if I push it, it'll swing right. And if I pull on that, it'll swing to the left. They won't touch the tracks, so don't worry. Almost all machines have limiters in it where they won't let you actually do damage to the machine there. So don't worry about that. And then we'll bring it back to straight. Now that's our right joystick. There's usually some accessories on here underneath for a Komatsu machine. If it's an intelligent model, that's how you actually turn your automatics on. And there's other accessories on there as well. Right now we don't have anything extra on our machine, but that's typically what they would do. I've also seen dozer blades that'll actually turn right and left. That's how you swing it. So again, depending on the machine you're in, it'll do different things. But regardless, your right hand's always your blade control. That's our right. Now, our left is our driving. Now, very simple with that. You got forward, neutral, reverse. I'm going to go ahead and put my foot down on this. Again, it's not going to go right now. Actually, my lock lever up, it would go. So if I just had this up and put it in gear, the machine would start moving. So a lot of times when I'm cycling these, especially for training, we're either all the way down to minimum or your foot's on that control. There's forward, 1 click back is neutral, 1 more click is reverse. There's 3 clicks on this machine, forward, neutral, reverse. And then to steer it is just left or right. As hard as you go one way or the other, that's how hard that machine's going to turn, left or right. Then you've got speed settings. This is where your digital display in front will come into play. Now, at certain settings, Komatsu can either do a variable speed or it goes 1, 2, 3, depending on what you're setting, you have it set. We have it on variable control, so as I click this, I see an indicator in front that gives me there's little bars there that'll give me an indicator of what that speed setting. Obviously, lower is slower, higher is faster. Always recommend starting at the lowest speed setting to get going there. So that's my left joystick. Again, each one will be a variety based on the manufacturer you're using, on whether how they turn or the speed, but left is always going to be the driving. The final piece is that foot pedal. I just have my foot down on. Typically, you're going to have a 1 or a 2 pedal system in there. So prefer single pedal. Those are probably the more common nowadays. And really there's one that's just an engine decelerator. That's the primary. You're going to find that in every machine. So as you see me put that foot down, you'll see the engine comes down to idle. That's what will stop a machine. For this dozer, if I'm in gear right now, which I am forward right now, it will not move forward at idle. Now, the reason you'll see a second pedal, there is I call it a brake. So on some larger machines, there'll be 2 pedals in there. The other one, this will bring it down to idle, and then the other one will actually be a pedal that will stop the machine as well. So it actually apply a brake. to keep it from coasting. Generally, you don't need to use it. If you just bring the engine down to idle, even if you're just slowly coasting, you can change your gears, forward, neutral, reverse. But I do always recommend you never want to just take it in or out of gear without having that engine decelerator engaged. Now on these single pedal systems, they're a little bit deceiving. For Komatsu here, and I don't know, you probably can't see it, but behind the pedal there's actually there's another little switch behind. When I push this down onto this it looks like a stopper, that is an alternative, that is that brake, it applies it. So if I'm holding it down now, if I push it in even further, it engages that actual brake. So if I really needed to keep this thing from even, sometimes if you're on an incline, the machine will just, at idle, it will slowly kind of coast or drift. If you apply that all the way down, it will actually apply a brake and stop the machine. Rarely do you need to use it though. It's just something that's good to obviously know that's there. So, back there and back in neutral. So other than those are my controls. Again, my settings in the center here, I can see my speed. If you'll notice on the Komatsu, when I put it in reverse, I've got a backup camera. That's good to know. I've also got a mirror in front of me, and it's always good to be looking over shoulders. So, those are all my base controls. Now let me just show you a few of those. So if I always have my foot down the pedal, put it in forward gear. If I slowly let my foot off the pedal, my machine is moving. Now, I'm at that lowest speed setting. Again, always encouraged to have it at that lowest speed setting initially. Now, if I want to go faster, I'm just using that button, and I'll start clicking up, and I'll see that go faster. Now to stop the machine, you always stop with your foot. So I put this foot pedal all the way down, that brings me to a stop. You always want to do that before you change gears at all. So now I'm going to go in reverse. Backup camera comes up. Again, it's always good to be looking over your shoulders. I've got my backup camera, I got a rear view mirror right in front of me. And then I'm slowly letting my foot off, and I'm going to back up. I can adjust my same speed on the Komatsu. My speed settings are up in the corner of the camera. Stop right there, and I'll put it back in forward. Now let's start moving forward here. Now you'll notice I'm doing everything with my left hand. So that's initially driving bulldozers with your left hand, not using your right hand at all. Generally, you want to adjust your speed with your fingers. You don't want to try and manage it with the engine throttle. So a lot of people, new operators, will try and use that foot pedal. So if I just push down, and now I'm going to slowly start making a left turn. Now you'll see on a Bulldozer, really on any hydraulic, it's slow, steady pressure. What you don't want to do is, I see a lot of new operators doing this, and they're stabbing the joysticks. You don't want to do that. You want to be nice and smooth with those controls. And then I bring this back around, and I'm going straight here. Line up to where I want to go. We'll say I'm just going to push right here. So first thing, before we start pushing any dirt, I always recommend for a new operator especially, is lowering that speed all the way down. So you want to be down at that lowest speed setting. At that lowest speed setting, you're going to be able to focus more on your right hand, which is your blade control. The biggest problem with a new operator is they just try and, their brain can't keep up with what that machine is tracking. So you want to go at that lowest speed setting there. Now, with my right hand, now I'm going to engage and bring that blade down. Now this is where I'm looking at the corners. Now what I really like about a Komatsu Bulldozer, the cabs the operator seat is it's much more forward of the norm. A lot of the other machines like Komatsu or Caterpillar, John Deere, they're sitting way further back. So this is nice, but either machine, you're looking at your corners of your blade. I can see both right there, and I'm trying to set them evenly in the ground. You don't ever want to get too aggressive. What you'll notice with this machine is I can actually lift the machine up. So if I keep pushing forward, you'll see I'm basically raising my tracks off the ground. And if I were to start inching forward, that whole blade's going to sink down into the ground. So you don't. You want to be very subtle with it, right above the ground. Now, I'm in forward gear, my speed all the way down, and then I'm just letting my foot off. Now again, the key is slow, subtle, little adjustments. I like to just let the blade slowly work in its subtle little adjustments. You'll see how I'm not really even touching the controls. It's going to slowly start biting in there. And I'm watching both sides, how it's kind of spilling off. I can tell how much material. Now if I can feel my right side, I call it the seat of the pants feeling. I can make little tiny adjustments. The big thing for a new operator is trying to just look at the big picture. Some people get so focused on that blade, they don't sit back to realize what their machine is doing. But I'm slowly trying to hold a grade here. Now for here, I'm just trying to build a trench and get started. And I'm gonna dump this all the way right here. Pick the blade all the way up. I'm gonna click in reverse. Checking where I'm going. Now, backing up is where I can make up a little bit of time. And you're gonna drive over some of your little divots up and down. So you just gotta be careful there. This one I'm just gonna try and do a little short trench here. Right there, back into forward. If I do bump your speed, you gotta lower it all the way back down. And I'm bringing that blade back down. Now again, the key to dozing, you're not gonna watch a video, you're not gonna take a class, there's nothing you're gonna do that's gonna make you good at grading. That is one of those skill sets that takes years and hundreds of hours of experience. So I can't stress enough, the best way to practice, get out in the machine and just try and hold a grade, try and do a trench, things like that. That's the only way you'll get better at this. So again, I put the blade back down, I'm gonna bite in just a little bit more, speeds all the way back down. I'm gonna start driving forward. Again, I'm watching my corners, letting it slowly try and sink in. I can already feel my right side is going a little bit lower. And again, it's that seat of the pants feeling. I'm looking at my horizon off the nose and I can see my entire machine. That's where you're trying to make that little bit of adjustment there to compensate. Biggest thing with operating a dozer is you gotta realize you're building your roadway right in front of your, I put the equivalent of going down the highway and laying the asphalt right in front of your car as you're driving. So if you make a mistake in that roadway right in front of you, you're gonna drive over it in 4 feet. Now, I wanna get to the point, and right now I'm loaded. You wanna have that dirt pretty much coming out over the top. I can see it rolling. You'll see it's gonna get to a point I'm pushing forward to kind of just stop my machine. That's where you just wanna pull back enough. You don't wanna keep just spinning your tracks, because if you do that, it's like a big conveyor belt. It's gonna keep pushing that dirt back behind you. But you also wanna be right at that edge. You're at max load. This is where the machine's most efficient, where you're rolling material right out in front of it. Then as I'm going, I can pull back. This one I'm just gonna create an upward slope, so I'm pulling back a little bit. And I'm gonna dump this material. You'll notice if I keep pulling it back, I just dump the material and leave a big old shelf. Now this one for this short trench, also knowing what your tipping point is. So if I drive right to the edge here, the machine's gonna pivot. So for us, and there, also understand where your handlebars are in your machine. These machines are, there's air ride seats, but there's not a suspension on them. So you don't want to come down too hard. You'll see I'll pivot right there. You can actually feel my machine balance right there. It is good to experience that and know what your machine's capable of. Bulldozers are actually very stable. All that weight is down low in between the tracks. So I'd say it's probably one of your most stable machines, but still good to know where those pivot points are on your machine. As I come down, I'm gonna bring this around. Now you'll notice on the Bulldozer, again, you saw me do a soft turn. I can, if I hold this left turn all the way hard right, it'll literally, one of my tracks will go forward, one will go reverse. Now this is not an ideal situation, mainly because you'll see what I'm doing to the ground. I'm tearing up all that ground and grooving a big old divot. So the machine will do it, but I caution you on doing this too much. You generally want to maintain a forward track anytime you're turning any track machine. That way you're not disturbing the ground. Now, I'm going to back up, just do 1 or 2 backfills here. So we'll say I got a little bit of material there. Now backfilling, really the opposite. Lowering the blade. The key on this is you're always trying not to disturb any of the fresh, I call it virgin soil, that I had. I'm just trying to hit the pile that I had. So I'm bringing this right down to the base, and I'm trying to go right down the center. I'm cutting into it while I'm going forward. And trying to hold that grade until the roadway ends. Right there's done. Bring it back, Anytime you're backfilling, these are short, repetitive pushes. You only want to back up far enough where that blade is right before the pile. You don't have to run a grade that far. You just want to go to where the load is. You also want to make sure your nose is pointing into your trench. If I have it pointing out one way or the other, that's basically the direction your machine is trying to carry that load. So I'm going right down the center. Slowing it down. I'm using my downward button there. And this is where I'm looking out in the horizon and I'm trying to hold a grade to just backfill that little bit of material, that trench I did. Depending on how much material, I usually hit them in the center. Sometimes you can hit them off the corners too. It really depends on how you want to get started. After I do one or two from there, this is where I call it kind of that snowplow effect. It's using the angle. I'm still making sure my nose is somewhat in line. I don't want to be angled out one way or the other, but this is where you can see I can turn that blade one way or the other. So if I'm trying to pull that material in, I want to have that blade right in the center, lowering my speed. And this is where you're trying to pull that material. So for this instance, I'm trying to pull my material left. I'm watching my right blade tip because I don't want to spill off the right side, or at least keep it minimal. I'm trying to make sure everything gets pulled right in to the center where I'm going into the trench. And I kind of turn in at the end because I'm trying to pull that material in. Again, you kind of just keep going to that roadway end so that material falls out. For backfill, you don't necessarily want to pull the blade back. You don't want to lose that material. I'm going to do one more push. Again, trying to pull that material to the center. Do one more down the center here. You'll see I kind of had some material left over there, so sometimes and the key will show it in the next and more advanced portion of this, just trying to carry a load. You definitely don't want to grade by just trying to skim the surface. You want to have something. If you don't have material in front of your blade, you can't really grade because there's no dirt there to fill in any of the little holes. So you want to try and carry at least something that can fall in to any of those little holes that are in front of it. Now at the end of this, I'm going to go through. Final piece, we're going to talk about backdragging real quick. Now, after we've done that, the final piece is majority of the times you're pushing dirt forward. The final piece is backdragging. There is a way to float the blade, and this is the same in skid steers, bulldozers, wheel loaders. Basically disengage the hydraulics, so the lift is basically floating up and down. You only want to do this in reverse. Now, for a dozer, I set the blade in the ground. This is where this the button on the top here is what engages it. I hold that and I push it and I get a float symbol. Again, each machine's a little bit different, but I'll see a float symbol on my display and I do not want to drive forward. But now the blade, I'm just using the weight of that blade to back drag. Put it in reverse. Now when you're in float, you don't want to pull back or push forward. That'll take it out of float. But you can go left or right. So as I'm backing up here, again, starting slow, this is where I can see it, the same kind of looking at my horizon, what my machine's doing. I can feel my left side dipping, so this is where I can raise that side to dump a little bit more material there. Now you're gonna get plenty of operators that say floating is, it's the worst thing ever, you'll get made fun of at a job site. I don't really care. obviously it's designed in the machines for a reason, so that's my first tip I'll tell anyone. If it wasn't intended to be used, they wouldn't put it in the machine. Second of all, it's tips and tricks like this that I'm not the best at grading. This is not my skill set. Floating allows it to use that as a level bar there basically, and you're pulling it back, and you'll see at the end of this, I'm kind of making a nice smooth path in front of me. So it does what it's intended to do by smoothing it out. It may not get you exactly level, but it's gonna at least be smooth at the end of that. Now the key at the end of float though is I've got a pile of dirt behind the blade. What you don't wanna do is just pick your blade up, because if I was to do that, I pull it out of float, this is what it looks like. You leave a big pile. So that's not good. So the key at the end of these, once your blade's down, put it back in float. I'm gonna back up just a little bit. Once you get to the end, I take it out of float and you keep trying to drive backwards. Now it's not in float, so the blade is being held up by the hydraulics, and I'm still trying to work it out so I have it come out nice and smooth. Your goal is to end this where you don't have a big pile of dirt. Sometimes I push it forward a little bit. I'm watching where I'm going. And right there, my blade's hanging up in the sky, and I've basically floated that blade backwards. So that's the basic, the 101 elements, and floating some of those pieces. I'm gonna go over and park, and we'll go over a few more pieces for the advanced side. Okay, so that was the 101 segment, kind of the basic operating controls. Now for this last piece, we're gonna go into a little bit more advanced techniques. Like I said earlier, there's no class video you're gonna watch that's gonna make you a good operator. It's all about seat time. So that's the best way to learn. Now the three things I wanna cover here in the advanced portion is, first of all, just blade angle. Second of all will be slot dozing. And then the third will be grading techniques, different pieces there. So that's what we'll cover. Now, if you'll notice the first thing, I parked incorrectly for a reason. Talk about blade positioning. The first thing, so you don't look like a newbie, parking with your blade up in the air or anything like that, there is a step. It's very similar to a skid steer or any other machine where you have to step on that. So you always want to make sure that blade is resting on the ground. So that's the first piece there. Now, with blade positioning, this is something, and again, for you operators out there, I know this is going to be really downplaying it and you're going to think that's so obvious, but what I've noticed with new operators, sometimes telling them the blade is attached to the machine is something that they have to see to believe kind of thing. And what I mean by that, if you notice in the initial training video I mentioned, you're building your roadway in front of your tracks, and it's like driving down the interstate, laying asphalt in front of you. And if you don't know what that blade is doing, then you really don't know what your machine's gonna be doing, because that's what you're gonna be creating. The only thing that really matters on this machine for a grade is the distance from the edge of that blade to the front of those tracks. That little 4 or 5 feet right there is that discrepancy between what the tracks are driving along and what the dirt or mound is going to be doing in front of it. So I like to show new operators, I get them out and let's show them this, the different blade positioning. Sometimes taking something as simple as a plastic PVC pipe. If you put that down at the bottom, and I can see up there, you can see if I have a load of dirt, I'm gonna create an upward slope right now. So I know it seems really obvious, but sometimes just seeing that, if I know that my blade is up and I have material, if I keep going like this, the tracks are gonna catch up and drive up the hill, and it keeps going at an incline. Conversely, the same thing, you want that blade, if that blade is flat to the tracks, that's the angle you're gonna hold. And then you got the other avenue too. If my blades were higher, my tracks were higher, blade was down, I'm creating a downward slope. So it's something as simple as understanding the correlation between this blade and these tracks, that distance right there. Once you can understand that, it's a lot easier to hold a grade. The other thing I do for a training element is I can look, if you just watch a bulldozer grading, a lot of times I will know, I can look at the cylinder, how much I call it silver, is showing on that hydraulic cylinder. That'll let me know that position on that blade. If it's up, if there was nothing showing right here, that blade's all the way up in the air, you're gonna keep creating an upward slope. And conversely, if this thing's fully extended, that's down, it's creating a downward. So those are some of the basics on blade positioning. Now I'm gonna get into the cab and just show you a few more things with that. get in the cab here. Seatbelt on. Okay, throttle it up. Lock levers. So again, I had that blade up in the air. Now, again, so blade angle, that's something that is really, again, it seems so obvious to people, but I like to show them because I think I've seen new operators that connect, just seeing that pipe going, oh, that makes sense. Because that roadway is going to keep building that angle. So understanding that machine. And like I said, just watching a dozer is a great way from a distance. You can see that machine, how it reacts. Biggest thing for being good at grading, and a couple of techniques, is looking at your horizon, knowing your distance. Don't get so hyper-focused on that blade. You have to see the bigger picture. Now, one technique I just want to go over really quick, slot dozing. And this is more of something that I would say is going to be in a mining operations where you have really large dozers. But if you did need to move a large amount of material, a larger distance, slot dozing kind of gives that capability. And what it is, it's basically building slots in the ground to hold the dirt. Now, dozers are really powerful, but the blade can only hold so much. So what you'll notice, if you just hold a grade, you have spill, you have material going off the sides. The idea between this is short pushes that create a trench, a deep trench, and what that does, it locks in that material because the machine itself can push more than is on there. So with that, I'm going to do it right here. I'm going to go down, and you're going to get aggressive right off the bat to wherever you're starting. So if I go really aggressive, I'm going to let this try and bite in down there. I'm going to get stuck here in a sec, and I'm just going to push this. And I'm trying to get as aggressive as possible. And then I'm leaving my material. So this might be my start. I'm backing out of that. I'm going to drop down here. This is the part you want to be careful of right there. Anytime you get aggressive with that blade, I'm going back one more. Dropping that blade again, same thing, going really aggressive. And I'm gonna go over the edge here, into the slot. Right there. Backing out of this again. Careful, my machine is going to do that. Backing up another, 5 feet or so. Going aggressive again. Now what you're going to see here, now that I'm down in this slot, you'll notice the material, front end's going to come down, doesn't have anywhere to go. So it has no place to go, but basically stay right up. I'm going to be able to maintain a max load. You'll see how much more material. If you notice earlier, I wasn't able to get that blade that full. This allows the dozer to really maximize that horsepower. It's holding all that material right up in front. Drop it down. And again, I'm going really aggressive initially, and I'm basically working my way backwards. But the biggest thing is normally if I was doing that at ground level, you would see a bunch of material spilling off the sides. If you notice right now, I'm actually holding all of that. I'm carrying a lot of material. So that's what slot dozing is really good for. The other thing too is when and this is all about, this isn't grading, this is just moving a lot of material. Speed, this is where you're gonna start making up more speed. Instead of doing long pushes where you're just moving a little bit, I'm able to push a lot more material. And I can also go at a higher speed because I really don't care about the materials it's going to carry in front because it's got nowhere else to go. So now that my slot's got, 20 feet or so, now I can ramp up my speed and you'll see I'm just carrying that material. It's not spilling off my sides. It's going right down the channel. So this you would just repeat. By the end of this, I might have a slot that's 100 feet long. But the reality is I'm carrying, instead of just slicing off little layers, I'm basically building a channel to hold all that. Because if I were to try and do the same thing for 100 feet, I'm going to spill more. My machine's not going to be at the max utilization because you just can't hold that much material. Whereas if I have a slot, I'm going to carry it longer. So that's slot dosing. Now, let's go a little bit into grading. Okay, that was slot dosing. Again, ideally you would do multiple slots. So if it's a big site, and I might actually keep that 3 to 5 feet wall in between, and then eventually be able to connect the two. Not used a lot in mining applications. I think they use a lot more. I have no experience in that. Haven't been in a mine at all, but you can see plenty of videos. But for a job site where you're trying to move a lot of material to one side, slot dosing is probably something that you should consider instead of taking off a layer. Now, let's just go over general grading. First of all, I'm just going to push this back in. Like I said earlier, the best way to get really good at grading is just be in the get seat time, stick time. So what that means is if you have access to a dozer in a site, get out there and just make a mess, backfill it. Now initially here, I'm just doing a backfill. So these are, as we went over in the 101, these are short repetitive pushes. I'm not doing a lot here. I am just backing up enough and I'm trying to get that blade loaded almost to the point where it's spinning my tracks. I usually do, I don't know, a couple down the center. Now, there's really, and this is what you'd probably, it's called rough grading. You got a rough grade or a finished grade. Rough grade is just putting in material. Doesn't have to be pretty, just backfilling. I would say a lot of what we do at the sandbox here is rough grading. You know, we're not trying to pave and put a roadway in, anything like that. So it's really understanding what your overall objective is. This is where, though, understanding regardless, even a rough grade, you want to try and come through and be able to, I say, get it somewhat level. You'll notice I went on the outside there, and now I'm pulling it in. Remember what we talked about in the first one is always trying to pull that material. My nose, I want aiming to where I'm trying to go with it. Okay, I think that was a really quick, rough grade. But now I think I've got enough. I can go to a finished grade. Now, a couple things finished grade. First and foremost, this is probably the most finesse. I am definitely not great at it either, but understand the concept of that blade angle. The other thing here, you don't want to, a lot of new operators will try and skim the surface to get a finished grade. You want to be loaded. If you don't have material in front of that blade, you can't fill anything in. So ideally, you want to have a loaded blade. The other pieces here, some little tips, is having just a little bit of an angle to your blade. The reason that is, if you go straight perpendicular to your tracks, and you'll notice I call it, it's either washboarding, roller coaster, you'll notice if you don't have that good grade, you'll do this. And any operator has done that. I'll probably do it today for you, just to see it. But if you have that blade straight and you end up notching up and down, your tracks drive over that evenly. What I've learned is a really good technique is if you just have a little bit of an angle at that blade, what that does is it allows, it's not being even when it hits your tracks then, so you won't get that washboard effect is all. So I'm gonna drop that blade down. And actually, I'll be going the other way just because I know I'm pulling it in, so I'm gonna pull this in a little bit. I'm gonna try and get loaded, and then the key here is slow. So you'll notice I ramp my speed all the way down. I'm watching both edges. I'm also looking at my horizon. But I'm trying to carry a load. If I'm feeling good with it, that's where I can start adding just a little bit of speed. I can feel my left side dipping right now. And I'm making little tiny adjustments. But I have a loaded blade right now to carry material to fill in any holes or anything that is in front of me. For this, I happen to have still a fairly large hole from where I was doing the slot dosing. But I'm letting it drive out, so it just stopped. I still see dirt coming off that one side, and I'm slowly raising it. Now you'll see, I can go backwards faster. You see I'm relatively smooth there. I'm gonna go over to one, And again, I'm going to angle my blade just a little bit. I'm going to lower that speed down. This is where I see new operators get in trouble. And again, understanding that I'm looking at my nose, I'm trying to see where my position is on the machine. This is where, again, I call it seat of the pants feeling. This is where I can sense my machine, what it's doing, and make those little adjustments to the blade. The key here is don't get frustrated. As a new operator, this does not come easy. It will take time, but that's where getting seat time in there. Now, the other strategy real quick to close this out. So I showed you how to angle the blade. The other thing, if you get really frustrated and you're trying to grade along here and sometimes you're gonna get the scent, you're just going up and down. And you're gonna get frustrated. It's gonna happen, I guarantee it. Sometimes approaching it at a little bit of a different angle. So maybe a 45-degree angle to what you were. So if you're going this way, I may go at a little bit of an angle. So what that does, it's the same kind of concept I talked about with your blade angle, is if you're going at a little bit of an angle, your material's not hitting it the exact same. So, at least when it hits the tracks, I should say. So sometimes going at just like a 45 or under a 45 or so and try and cut in, that sometimes will help you. So if just by doing a little adjustment to approach at a different angle, that could help your grading as well. In the end, you're going to get better with time. Final piece I always say, the back drag. Don't be afraid. Here, I'll show you one final one. I made that relatively smooth going forward, which every operator, there's so many people say you can't back drag. I wouldn't be on the machine if you couldn't. And again, you'll see what it does. It's because it's carrying a load behind the blade, I'm filling in any of those little divots. And I can still make my adjustments. I feel my right side, taking it out of float at the end, so it kind of just gently, and there we go. I've got that relatively flat. Okay, let's go park this thing and I'll show you the final piece shutdown for the day. Okay, final piece, now that I've parked it, always setting the blade flat in the ground. Went over that. Foot off the pedal. I always like to have foot off pedal, that way I know it's on gear. Throttling it down. Safety lock levers. Now again, you really don't want excessive idling, especially in newer machinery. The ones that have diesel exhaust fluid, they run. There's a regeneration process. There's other things that idling is actually bad for them because they want to be under work to actually burn off some of the soot and things. So there's a whole nother video we do on idling, things like that. But anyways, let it idle 30 seconds to a minute. I let it cool down. But at the end of the day, obviously fuel, I'm looking at that. The last thing you want to do is leave your machine where it's not ready for the next day. A lot of job sites, you're going to fill up, or there's someone that comes in overnight, they're going to fill it. But I'm still looking at everything, my diesel exhaust fluid, making sure everything's good. After that, done, shut it down. The final piece, as an operator, take care of your machines. If you got trash, you got water bottles, things like that in there, make sure you clean out your machine. We have little brooms that we keep right next to, pull that up. We keep a little broom in there, sweep our machines out. You know, how you do anything is how you do everything. So I really like to show the attention to detail that we like to take care of machines. And I tell you right now, if you're working for someone that's paying for that machine, they're going to be impressed if you're keeping your machine clean. So that's that. Open it up. Okay, again, that broom, we keep it right here, right out that machine. So that final piece, again, we clean out our machines, make sure they're locked, things like that. Once I'm outside of the machine, it's also very important to clean out your undercarriage, your track. So we always keep a shovel, some kind of shovel, something like this. Depending on material, you don't want to let all this just stay in the track. So it's important at the end of the day to make sure you clean out your undercarriage. So I'll go all the way around there, clean out the entire undercarriage, and then finally, just making sure, it's kind of like a post-op inspection. I walk around, make sure there's no damage, anything done to the machine. So, okay everyone, so that's the end of our long version training for the Bulldozer. Again, we covered all the major components there, but again, we'd encourage any comments on our YouTube video. If you have comments, anything you would recommend for new operators. Again, I hope you guys like this longer format video. We'll try and do these for the other equipment as well, but give us your own feedback on that. Thanks for watching this video. Take care.